MTU. I was in MTU, and Dermot, I think you were lecturing in UCC at that point, and we were working on a wellbeing project, amongst other projects. But we really connected on the when we were discussing autism. Um, as I said, Dermot was a consultant on the project, and as we got to know each other, we decided that we created Creos, which was an organisation that focuses on creativity for autistic people. And we started running workshops, and that's alongside our other jobs. So um, I would be an artist, facilitator, and I also work with dogs. So there's a lot of dogs in this house. So I apologise for any barking. Dermot, do you want to talk about your work kind of?
Yeah, so I work with autistic people from adolescence to adulthood. And I've been doing that for about 16, 17 years, something, maybe a bit longer even at this point. And the way I work with people is it's very much a person-centered approach, and very much, particularly with the adolescents I work with, or, there's a lot of anxiety, which we'll talk about a little bit more later on, but connection and belonging are hugely important to the cohort I work with. And so, like a lot of the work that I do and that we've done with Creat has been around that, and particularly that connection as well between creativity and a sense of connection, identity, and belonging. But we'll talk about that a little bit in a while as well.
And then I think it's important to add that we both received adult diagnosis of autism. So, coming from that experience as well as the professional experience, I think is quite important. And I know that like you probably would be, he's probably a better person to talk about autism in general, might be a good point now to do that.
Yeah, I can do. So like I'm gonna I know that there's going to be a facility for people to ask questions and stuff in the chat box. So there might be questions afterwards, but I'm going to just do like a really, really quick kind of explanation of it. Now, like when I first started doing this work, like those years ago, everything would be explained to me as the triad of impairments, or the triad of blah, 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 as I prefer to call it these days, because there's an awful lot of like really clinical language like in the descriptions of autism. Not a big fan of that at all. Having said that, like I would say in general, from the perspective of the work I've done, I'd say like the things that most frequently come up for the people I work with, and the things that are most common with the people I work with, and in research as well. Anxiety probably would be the biggest thing, I would say, biggest commonality. Obviously, each person with autism is like a unique individual, same as anyone else is. But anxiety certainly would be a commonality amongst a lot of people. Difficulties with social interactions, and maybe like a really significant one is like in psychology they call it an intolerance of uncertainty, and it's something that's gotten talked about a lot more since COVID. About the population generally, but like in terms of autistic people, one of the things that a lot of autistic people prefer, sometimes need, is certainty. And a lot of the things that a lot of autistic people do in terms of how they live their lives is in response to uncertainty. So even that anxiety is a response to uncertainty, and that uncertainty is the difference between a neurologically divergent person and a neurologically typical person. When you live in a world that isn't run in the way that you probably your brain works, then that creates a dissonance immediately. So like those would be I'd say some of the more important things. As I said, I don't want to go into like a big long explanation or an academic explanation, because I don't think that's helpful really. And if people want to read that kind of stuff, please do, by all means. The one other thing I'd say is like a question I was always interested in, and I suppose now that we've both been diagnosed, is what does it feel like? What's it actually like to be autistic? And I think one of the things is is feeling different, I suppose, is probably maybe the most succinct and accurate description of it. Not just different necessarily to the people around you, but to sometimes even in your own body, like not feeling part of your own body, not feeling part of things, like that sort of concept of connection that we talked about. I think we'll probably talk about that a bit more anyway in terms of the forest schools, like we said. But yeah, that'll be the thing, I think.
Yeah, like I always describe it as like wax and water. I sometimes feel like wax and water in social situations. I'm the wax in the social situations of the water. I wonder now, that might bring us nicely to if someone was, so for example, if I was going to sign up to a forest school event or any event that's new to me, I might be very excited about that event. I'm a very outgoing person. I'm very confident, but I do have these other, these other things that I deal with on a daily basis. So I would be very excited to sign up for the event, but the event might loom, as the event gets closer, my anxiety might get higher. So I might start to worry about what's going to happen on the day, who I'm going to meet, what are the expectations, am I going to get there on time? Even, am I going to be saying, doing, wearing, being the right thing on the day? That's a lot of questions, and that can snowball, and it can get harder and more difficult to perceive this event in a positive light, even though it's a really positive thing. So we were kind of talking about, in our other trainings, we talk about the anticipation and paving the way so that people can know what to expect. And so, say you might have a map, you might have social stories, you might have pictures, images of what's coming, a very detailed, this is what you might need, this is what might happen, this is what the expectations might be. And when myself and Diarmuid were chatting about this, because we think being in nature and things like forest school are really just so important and really brilliant for neurodivergent young people, especially. It's a game changer considering the way that the world is at the moment, and the amount of even teenagers sitting on their bedrooms on the internet, but anyway, so we were talking about things like, if you had a video reference so that you could see what's coming, you could meet the person almost that is facilitating. You might get to know a little bit about who else is there if you don't already know them. You might be given a list of things that will make the day easier. It might rain, waterproofs, we're going to provide this. This is kind of a rough timetable. All of these things, which I'm sure you do in many different ways, but doing it in more ways than one. So video, text, sound, even, pictures, photographs, familiarize it. So if I can see where I'm going to be, if I can see what I need, because sometimes messages get lost in text. Is there anything I've missed there?
Well, I think that one of the things that we also discussed just in terms of the possibility, for example, of making a video in advance, and this comes back to what we were talking about already about the intolerance of uncertainty. Like what you're doing is you're creating as much as is humanly possible, at least some degree of certainty, certainly expectations. But one of the things that we talked about was that autistic people themselves should probably make that video. I mean, there's places that you could go, colleges, art colleges. I'm sure there'd be loads of autistic people that would just love to, be involved in something like that. And having done stuff like that myself in the past, I was involved in like a documentary making project at one point. Stuff will come out that you're not going to think of, So hand it over to the people that are, like the people who are going, like representatives of the people who are going to be sort of attending the forest schools. Yeah.
So that's we're going to kind of try and cover as much as we can. So that's the in advance kind of preparing the way. Accommodations, I wouldn't be scared to ask if there are any accommodations. What do you need? Especially, I suppose, we were talking about mixed groups, and finding out what different people need is quite important. Like, for me, I'll be honest, and this might not be the best time to be completely honest, but having access to a toilet is really important, like really important. Do you know? So that would be my one question. How am I going to be able to go to the toilet? Do you know? And okay, it sounds very simple. You just ask, but you know, it can build and it can build and it can be quite stressful. Where are we then?
Well, I still haven't convinced you to wear a nappy, but like
Anyway.
we'll work on that. I think the other thing as well, just in terms of accommodations and stuff and mixed groups, like a conversation we were having earlier on as well was just about like my experience of running particularly adolescent groups of autistic people is, you know, someone's sort of place on the spectrum, as it were, is potentially important to the members of the group. And like, this is a delicate conversation for me to have, but I have to have it. And so, for example, the feedback I would have gotten from, let's say, some of the young people I work with who would be in mainstream schooling and would probably have fallen under the category of Asperger syndrome, which is someone who has autism but doesn't have an intellectual disability, and had language acquisition. You know, like that cohort of people are already feeling very, very stressed about not wanting to be different to the people around them at school. And so the feedback I've gotten a lot is if I have a mixed group, a mixed ability group, oftentimes the people, the autistic people I'm working with in mainstream schooling really feel uncomfortable about that. Now, my perspective on that is I can see it, but obviously that doesn't mean that people with intellectual disabilities and autism, etc., shouldn't do these groups. They should do the groups. So our advice in terms of what Gala was saying about accommodations and stuff is, if you are going to have a mixed group, please do that very carefully. That would be my advice. Please do that very, very carefully with all the potential participants.
Find out what people need. Yeah. Don't be scared of that conversation. I suppose expectations we never covered as a facilitator. What are my expectations? You know, sometimes I learned very early that, so we would do workshops and we'd do the online thing during COVID, you know, and a lot of the young people we worked with would have their cameras off. There'd be no interaction. And we'd finish a session and I'd be like, oh, I don't know if that session worked for that person at all. You know, it really ate me up for a little while. But then at the end of the 6-week course, we'd get these lovely messages and pictures of beautiful artworks that had been created. And people were saying that, you know, they really looked forward to the sessions and they were like, they really loved being part of the community. And I'd never heard their voice, never seen their face, never, you know, or like, you know, how people interact with you isn't necessarily the way that you're going to expect them to, but don't take that on board as something you're doing. Sometimes being there is enough. You know, sometimes being part of something is enough. You know, you might not get someone going, woohoo, I'm here and you know, this fresh air, but actually just physically being there could be a total game changer for their week, you know, or
and also the fact that, like, you know, if someone has made it to a first school, maybe that's the amount of energy that they have available to them for that period of time. So it's enough to be there. The extra energy it might take to interact with people and do the extra things might be just too much. So
social interactions. I'm very. Do you mind if I just talk about group work quickly, or am I skipping ahead?
No, go on.
Yeah. So I have a big thing, you know, when you go into a group or a college or whatever it might be, and you have to sit in a circle and you introduce yourself, and you're sitting, and I'm a confident person, but I'm sitting waiting for my turn and the pressure and, you know, not doing that. There's a great writer, Pete Warmby, that I'm really enjoying at the moment, and he talks about working in a group versus working as a group, or, you know, so it's enough to be part of a group. You know, you don't have to be all working together, taking turns, you know, it's enough to kind of be there, or how you get people to introduce themselves or do your icebreakers. It's very off-putting to do it the traditional way for people like me, and you're not very good at that kind of thing either.
There are a few things that I have nightmares about. One of them is role playing or introduction games at the beginning of any group.
They're very they're a minefield. So do you know, I love is when people have name badges, because I'll forget people's names. I forget my niece's name sometimes when I'm in a social panic, and it's my brain just glitches out. So really nice sort of easy prompts to keep people kind of knowing the name of the facilitator or the name of whatever, or, and non-pressure environments, not that build up to it's my turn to tell you what my favorite whatever is. But also being very clear on what your expectations are. If you do have a group or a person that you expect them to do something, to be very clear about that, because you might get a nod of yeah, I totally understand what you're saying, and then I come away and I'm like, I haven't a clue, you know, or
what like and then as well, like one of the sort of other like features for a lot of autistic people is being a visual learner. So it's just interesting. This is completely coincidental, but just in the last couple of weeks, I've been doing this piece of work with the people I work with, just a kind of an autism profile and going through the different components of what it is to be autistic. Like, but visual learning is one of the sort of components that's frequently talked about as being an aspect of autism. And the people I talk to, and I know this is anecdotal, but the people I talk to all said, if I'm shown something, there's a way greater likelihood that I'll know what you're asking me to do than if you verbally tell me. I would absolutely not really subscribe to that. I mean, when I was in college, I had like a 2-second memory, I would say, something like that, like where if a lecturer asked me what they had said 10 seconds previously, I'd be like, I have no idea. I just couldn't take it in. I was taking notes. So yeah, like visual learning in that way. And then just one other aspect of that, or one other component of that, written instructions work really, really well for a lot of autistic people. And like, I don't know, you know, like this might be me going off on a flight of fancy, so like please feel free to ignore this, but I was just thinking like there's all kinds of visual ways you could do that. Like, you know, you could make it really nice. You know, like you could sort of make that a project actually as well. How do I actually, you know, sort of create some sort of like template for instructions and make it visually nice as well? I mean, obviously, I'm going to say you should get some autistic people to help with that as well, but of course I would say that, wouldn't I?
Yeah, the visual thing, I really resonate with that. And talking about group work, a lot of autistic learners would, in a group scenario, might watch their peers do something and get so much more out of that interaction than having to demonstrate it for themselves, you know, because the pressure of actually doing it can be quite tough. I work sometimes with the Brothers of Charity in an ASD unit. And, you know, sometimes you're very unsure about what you're doing. You know, is it working? Is it not working? So I do things like I make it a little bit simpler in that I'll get my person I'm supporting to rate things. So I'll be like, how many stars would you give that out of 5? And, you know, sometimes it's 4 stars. So, you know, we could be doing something, we could be having coffee. And I'll be like, how many stars? And he'll go 5 stars. You know, it takes the weight of language away from it. It's a very simple, or we would use a nice way to do things is if you're out in nature, you could have people. So we used to use a green piece of paper and a red piece of paper, and you use it as a voting system. So rather than having to verbally say, well, I would prefer if we did this, you can get an instant answer by hold up the red card if you want to do X, or hold up the green card if you want to do X. You know, it's a very quick, effective way to get feedback or decisions made, or that kind of democratic. But you could do it with a leaf and a branch. You know, hold up a branch if you want to take a break, or, you know, hold up a leaf if you want to, I don't know, sit closer to the fire, or whatever it might be. You know, there's fun ways of doing that, and it's giving you feedback the whole time. Yeah.
I guess like one of the things that we kind of wanted to take into consideration here as well was like the idea of, our own experiences in nature. Now, obviously, we're people of a certain age. So, like we grew up at a time when, technology wasn't to the forefront as it is now. But like just like a couple of things, one of the things I definitely found when I was young was nature was a solace to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I suppose like even when we were talking about it, thinking about it earlier on, I was just thinking about how I've always found like a really big connection between my experiences in nature and whatever minuscule amount of creativity I have.
Yes.
It would just like, spark my imagination an awful lot. Um, Something I became sort of more aware of during COVID, as I'm sure a lot of people did during lockdowns, was how loud uh, birds are. Um, and just doing even like a little bit of research in the last couple of years around birdsong. Birdsong, in even of itself, has a calming effect and a positive effect in terms of mood and well-being. So, like I suppose our own experiences as autistic people was or were that like it was a different time when like
we were feral.
yeah, your parents didn't really want to see all that much if it was possible. So, get out there and run around the field or whatever.
But that brings us, I suppose, to this generation now that are so glued to their technology and they don't have the same freedom, So being able to move around the outdoors, your physical body, the fresh air, is really important. And I don't know, I suppose being able to shout and run and move, once those, like when we go to a group, we always set some rules, and the rules would be you can move in any way you want around the room, you can go to the toilet at any point you want, you can ask a question whenever you want. We always set those housekeeping rules. And I think, when you've got maybe a group of younger people who are indoors a lot or in school or in that high pressure atmosphere, not having the same rigid rule set, but still knowing what the rules are is kind of important. So I think setting that as part of your expectations is kind of important too, and could be really good fun. Yeah. Yeah, the creativity side of things as well. Well, I do a lot with wood and different things, and I think we have some resources on our website. We'll give Leona the addresses so that you can see what we've been up to creatively.
I guess another thing about being outside in nature, like this obviously is somewhat dependent on the environment you're in at a particular time, but for the most part, there's a predictability about being in nature. There's a predictability about being in the woods, for example, or just being outside generally. That doesn't probably exist in an awful lot of areas of life, and it's this weird kind of dichotomy now, or weird oxymoron, maybe might be a better word, where you go into your room, you go on a device, someone shit talks you, and it absolutely ruins your day or your week or whatever it might be. So safety and the concept of what safety is in a home is and a safe space is, I think, is a little bit more questionable now in that regard. I mean, it seems to me like, obviously most people would still say like that their home is still the safest space or whatever, but like if you're an adolescent and if you're online a lot, even if you're not an adolescent and you're online a lot, chances are you're not going to probably feel that same way. Even if it isn't about safety, we're not psychologically set up, I don't think, really to take in the amount of information that's coming at us in the world. And something that I really also, I know, I imagine loads of you have had this experience as well. I'm not claiming it to be anything unique, but again, during COVID lockdowns, I got into the rhythm of nature and the seasons in a way that I hadn't done since I was a kid, since we were outside all the time and stuff. And I think there's something about that as well. Like, reality is what we perceive it to be. And if you're sitting in front of a screen all the time, either being bombarded with all the good news from America or wherever, or just people shit talking you, like that's just such a damaging thing to our psyche. It's creating a lack of empathy and stuff like that as well, I believe. you're outside in nature and it's just very different to that. You feel connected to it. You feel connected to yourself more. And even in terms of empathy and stuff, I know this might sound whatever, but like, like seeing how nature works, I think actually can kind of promote empathy more so. I think when you're online and all you're doing is interacting with people that you're never going to see or actually have a conversation with, it's so easy to lose that side of ourselves as well, like that connection to other people. And I know that goes back to what I was saying about talking about at the beginning about connection and belonging. I think that's a huge thing, really, for people generally, and it's a huge thing for autistic people as well. Autistic people don't generally want to be alone. I mean, some people do, but most autistic people don't. Most autistic people choose to be alone as opposed to running the gamut of being in a social situation that could be, very difficult or very anxiety inducing. So the sort of decision to be alone isn't one where it's like, well, I don't want to be around other people because I don't like them. It's I don't want to be around other people because it's too difficult sometimes.
Too stressful, or So we're back to anxieties. Is we've come around to anxiety again, and I suppose we can't say enough that finding ways to appease the anticipation anxiety, the expectation anxiety, and there will be logistics that you have no control over, how people get to you, where they're coming from. But I suppose if you're mindful and you take that into account, I can't emphasize enough how important it is to me to feel secure in what it is I'm doing next, And like we were talking about, someone was giving a talk recently and they were late for the talk, and then they were disorganized, and the levels of stress that we felt from that, so I have definitely have a huge emphasis on time. If you say 1 o'clock, then I'm going to think that you mean 1 o'clock, not 5 past, not 10 past. And as time goes by, it does stress me more and more. And I don't have much control over that, unfortunately. So I kind of suppose, in a way, I'd always hope that what people say they're going to do is what they're going to do time-wise. And I've seen that a lot, and there's a couple of autistic groups we're in, but I've seen, lunch is going to be at 1 o'clock, and someone's just there going, it's 5 past 1, it's 10 past 1, yeah.
If it's okay, I'm going to get like a little bit nerdy on your asses for very briefly. The latest sort of talk and sort of theory in neuroscience about the creation of reality is that in the first instance, it's our senses that are taking in the information from the environment around us, and that then gets combined with memories and experiences and stuff. And it's thought to be the combination of those two things that help us form our sense of reality. There are sensory differences in the experiences of autistic people. And that could be anything. It could be hearing things in a way that other people don't. I guess the most obvious example of that from an interior perspective is the high-pitched squeak of a fluorescent light. We have a squeaking noise in our kitchen for about the last 5 days, and
it's really ruining our lives.
Well, it's getting to the point where of madness, really, at this point. But I think that those sensory differences that autistic people feel, and that sort of idea of the senses being so heavily implicated in our sense of reality and a sense of self as well, means that to be out in nature also provides loads of opportunities to explore that. What feels good from a sensory perspective, what doesn't feel good, smells, everything. I think there's a way of exploring that potentially with people that could be very, very pleasant. That could be very, very helpful. Now, obviously, that would take a little bit of work in advance. Certainly that's what I would do. I would have even like a quick form beforehand and ask people about sensory differences or sensory sort of inputs. Now, just one really other quick thing about that. Generally, when sensory differences are talked about in the world of autism, it's always in the negative. Right? It's like, we can't be in crowded spaces. Well, yeah, that can be true a lot of the time. It is inextricably linked to anxiety as well. So the more anxious you are, the more likely you are to have sensory differences or experience sensory differences. But there's also sensory differences that are positive. And I think, to me, like first schools provide an absolutely unbelievable opportunity for that, you know, to have like really cool experiences in a way where we're talking about it in a positive way, not talking about it in a sort of deficiency way or whatever, you know. You can actually like have a something that you look forward to. And that's, by the way, especially in contrast if you're working with adolescents, and I'm not presuming you would be, but like if you're working with adolescents or kids, that's especially true in contrast to the school environment, which is a sensory hell for an awful lot of autistic kids. Just one other thing, again, I wanted to mention about just in terms of, now I don't want to encroach on the idea of what people might do individually or whatever. They do want to encroach, it turns out. But like there's a proven fact, right, that autistic people are better at recognizing patterns than neurotypical people. And I'm just looking there, I have a book on my desk. If anyone does happen to be interested, there's a book called Pattern Seekers by a guy called Simon Baron-Cohen. And he talks about the evolution of, I suppose, creativity and innovation. The Cultural Revolution happened sometime around maybe 60, 70,000 years ago, where we first started to see creativity in humankind. His thesis essentially is that it was autistic people were the first people who would have been doing that. It is a fact that that autistic people are better at seeing patterns than neurotypical people. But he's also saying that if we look back in history, you know, like there was let's just say there was a group of people sitting around, I don't know, whittling sticks or whatever they might have been doing. And then there's one person off on their own at a hill throwing some rocks down it, and suddenly realizes that the ones that aren't quite so square go down a bit more quickly. You see where I'm going with this. So, like, yeah, and it appears to me that, again, the first schools have a great opportunity there to use that side of things in a way that could be really cool and really beneficial. And I do have some skin in the game in this myself because I'm obsessed with fractals. So if I'm in nature and I see if I see a fern, I'm done. You know, that's me. You know, I'm camping out. I'm there. So yeah, like it seems like there could be great opportunity with that as well.
There's, with some of the people I work with, there's always an element of negotiation or problem solving. So, for example, I've a client who can't bear to walk in mud, you know, so you'd have to find a solution to that. He's also a toe walker. I don't know if you're familiar. He tends to walk on his toes, so his balance wouldn't be fabulous, and that's not unusual. So between the toe walking and the not wanting to get muddy feet, but you know, at the same time, why should he miss out on a great opportunity? You know, there's ways and means around that. You know, there's negotiations that can happen. You know, there's footwear things that can happen. You know, so I suppose looking at every problem as more of a kind of conversation or more of something that you can work through. I always kind of, I don't know what it is. It's like I kind of almost enjoy finding a way around some of these things that come up, because it's such a beautiful moment when you can actually get something positive. You can get away from this. I'm not walking on that mud and finding a way around that. You're not going to get your shoes dirty. You're not going to. We're going to negotiate this, and moving on to a positive experience is really, really satisfying, for sure. Yeah, I suppose that's as well the sensory thing again of just he perceives things in a different way. So, you know, I have to be empathetic and step into his shoes. You know, just I suppose the same way I asked or talked about my anticipation of an event coming up, you know, or the anxiety I might feel and how I'd be better prepared in these different ways that we've talked about.
I just thought of one other thing as well. There's a higher percentage of people with synesthesia in the autism community than in the neurotypical community, and I presume people generally know it, but like synesthesia is essentially a mixing of the senses, like that you hear colors or whatever it might be. And so again, like I would just see the potential, like for so many cool things that you could do with that. It's like one just observation about that. Frequently enough, when I'm talking to my clients about it, they don't realize that they have synesthesia until we actually have that conversation. And in general, like obviously it's not every person I work with, but like in general, when I talk to someone about synesthesia and I ask them, they say no, and then we discuss it, and it turns out they do. They'll say, "Oh, I thought everyone thought like that," or "I thought everyone sort of experienced the world like that." So I think it's always worth exploring as well.
Yeah. What have we missed out? We've probably.
I don't know. Like I feel like I'm a Bond villain here or something. No, I think we're okay, aren't we? I mean,
yeah. Time wise, Leona, did we?
You're doing really well, time-wise.
Gala, you're
Right,
fine.
exactly.
You're fine for time.
Brilliant.
I'm just wondering, it might help at this point. There's just a couple of comments have come in. I know we said we'd leave questions until the end, but there's one question and one comment that I'd like to read, if that's okay, because I think it's just going to reinforce some of the things that both of you spoke about there, Gala. Would that be okay?
Brilliant. Go for it. Yeah.
Okay, so there was just a question there came in from Amber. Would you have any suggestions of how you would handle the introductions, icebreakers in a pressure-free way? Because I think it's useful to hear everyone's voice, even if it's just their name, and for them to be given the opportunity to have their voice heard. Make it optional or something else? Question mark. What would your comments be on that, Gala and Diarmuid?
Yeah, I mean, you could make it optional.
Yeah.
That's certainly one way, and that way you might find everyone might say it, everyone might buy in. But like, I mean, it's a good question actually, and it's something I meant to say while we were talking anyway. Like one of the best things to do, I think, is just ask questions of people. If you're not sure about something or whatever it is, what do you prefer? Just ask questions of people. I know it's an obvious thing to say, but sometimes I find that people might be scared to ask a question in case they offend you, or also every now and then, not very often, thankfully, but every now and then, someone might sort of feel like they understand enough about autism already. But like, of course, the point about that is, everyone's different. So it's always worth asking the question.
Okay.
I do something quickly that, so I'll give two options. So if I'm meeting somebody for the first time or a group of people, I'll say, maybe it's Marvel villains or something, or apples and oranges. I might say to Diarmuid, apples or oranges, which would you prefer? And then quick fire. So everybody gets a chance to make a decision about what they prefer, and it kind of, when you're not waiting for a turn and someone just puts you in the spot and you've got two options or less information to process in that more stressful part of the day, the introduction to the most stressful part of the day. It's like quick fire, boom, boom. And then you get to know little things about what people prefer, and it can become quite fun, little things like that.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Lovely. Thanks, Gala. And just then there was a comment then just by Joan. Really interesting to hear, which I think this is a very interesting comment actually. Really interesting to hear nature described as predictable. Because often the other view, like the view that we would come from, the other view is taken that the risk is bigger outdoors. And you're right, it's kind of secure predictability rather than boring one, if that makes sense. Very interesting.
Yeah,
it is. Like we flipped things because, like, years ago, like I had to do a piece of work on the concept of home and what home means. Like obviously home is a house is only a building. It's only a shelter essentially. But the concept of home sort of changed as time went by. Like one of the things about home in like in the past.
Sorry.
Let's shut up, Dermot.
Like
One of the the sort of aspects of living together in the past was that everyone shared the same room, more or less. And what's really interesting now is like pieces of sociological research around the world based in areas, poverty-stricken areas, many of them, where people are living a more communal life, more outdoor life, tend to have higher rates of happiness. And I think there's something in that as well in terms of the forest schools and nature and what we're talking about home and what a home actually is. Like I think that's changed. So whereas before it was a space that, like one small space that we all shared, probably with a couple of farm animals as well, or 6 dogs if you're like us. It's changed to your home is your sanctuary. You've big gates outside, or you lock the door and you don't want to sort of interact with the rest of the world. It's shutting it out. But that's a complete fallacy, because you go to the device that most people have in their pocket every day. What you're doing is you're letting the world back in, and way, way, way more of the world back in than we've ever had to deal with before. So I think there is something in that in terms of how we look at this, that maybe we need to start looking at it the other way around a little bit.
Mm-hmm. At least, nature makes sense in many ways.
Of course it does, yeah. Even the seasons, the rhythm of the seasons and stuff like we were talking about earlier on, makes so much sense. You can see the different flowers, the different plants, the different growth. I know you all know more about this than me, so I'm just saying.
Wonderful. Gala, thank you, Diarmuid. Thank you so much, both of you. I mean, just some of the information that I've been absorbing, listening, has been just very, very powerful. And one thing that, I really resonate with is, the anxiety, the anticipation that somebody might feel. And I think it's quite common, actually, for a lot of people. I think it's common about, the anxiety before we step into something. So the role that we may have as facilitators, as far as school leaders, the more we can offer people prior to stepping in. So I love what you were saying, Gala, about the visual, the audio, the videos, using our creativity, something that's kind of quite visual that people can see as well and can identify, keeping it really simple also.
Yeah.
And also, I think around the senses, because yes, we would talk a lot about that in forest school, but from an autism perspective, that it's enough for us just to be there and allow people then for them to experience what they need to experience on their level without we having to step in and say, actually, no, maybe we need to do it this way. I mean, I'll give you an example, and then we will move on to Pouki, because I'm dying to hear what you have to say, Pouki, following on from all this. There's a young little boy, he's 9, that I'm working with at forest school, and he doesn't have a formal diagnosis, but clearly he struggles with certain elements of interaction with other children, and even interaction with us, and even interaction with his physical surroundings. So like that, Gala, what you were saying, if they want to shout, if they want to jump around, within reason to keep people safe, it's about saying, the rules in school, because it's so tough on them, the expectation here is very different. So by asking, what do you need? Sometimes they may not be able to answer that question. We may be able to see it in their behavior. So us being able to read into that as much as asking directly, I think is as important. So this guy goes around with a stick every single session, digging. That's what he does. Literally digging. And he leaves. Yeah, and he leaves, and he's just skipping back up the pathway to meet his mom afterwards, literally singing to his mom, "Mom, I had a fabulous time. Guess what I did? Digging again today." And I'm kind of going, maybe there's an archaeologist in the budding here. Who knows,
Yeah. Brilliant.
So wonderful. And also, Gala and Diarmuid, and I'll speak to you afterwards. Maybe we can kind of get a little resource list together, because you made some references in some of your conversation and presentation there about different books and authors. So maybe we can have a chat about that. And just for everyone listening and people who couldn't log in perhaps as well, then we'll compile all of that at the back end, and we'll send it out to everybody. Would that be okay?
That perfect. Yeah, we've loads of
Wonderful, wonderful. Gala, thank you so much. Diarmuid, thank you so much.
Thanks.
I'm going to hand over to Kathy now just to introduce Pouki. I'm going to put myself on silent and I'll see you all again shortly.
Hi everyone. It's just lovely to be here this evening, and my heart is filled listening to Gala and Diarmuid and Leona, your story as well. It's just lovely. A little bit about me. I'm Kathy Daly. I'm a play therapist and forest school leader, and I also offer parent and child nature connection groups in the woods. But for here today, I'm delighted to introduce Pouki. I've met Pouki and I've chatted with Pouki as well, and she's going to tell you a lot more about herself. But what I'm just going to introduce is that piece that at the beginning that Gala and Diarmuid talked about, that connection and belonging. Those words came to my mind from my discussions with Pouki, and it's heartfelt, that sense of connection and belonging she brings to everybody in her forest school, and help support children that are neurodivergent and children that aren't, and how to understand each other and to have a sense of belonging there. So it's with gratitude that I introduce Pouki, and I'm looking forward to hearing more on this lovely chats. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kathy. I'm gonna try to share something. I'm gonna figure out if it works or not. Could I ask either Kathy or Leona to, in a minute, tell me what they see, because I'll not be able to read any comments.
What do you need, Pouki? Sorry.
So I'm just about to share something, and I'll need you to tell me in a second if you can see just the nice little screen.
Yep, we have that.
Awesome. Ooh, it started by the end. Sorry about that. So, I am going to use a little presentation because this is actually going to be my visual prompt to be able to remember what I want to cover. And also to mention, I know that technically presenting, I should have a lovely bright light so you can all see my face. But being neurodivergent myself, I cannot deal with bright light at this time of the day, so that's as much as you'll see me for the day. So, introduction. Like I mentioned, my name is Pouki. My lovely accent comes from France. I have been diagnosed with ADHD in 2021. So how did that come about? I was actually working with young people that were neurodivergent. So some of them with Down syndrome, some of them with autism, some of them with intellectual disabilities, a big array of children. And for some reason, I noticed that I could really connect with them. I could really get them. I can remember a young nonverbal man who every time he was walking, he would hear patterns, he would hear rhythms. And I picked up on those patterns as well. And one day I joined his musical walking, and he looked at me as if suddenly we were talking the same language. So I could notice I had a lot of connection with all those kids, but I could not quite understand just yet. After a lot of reading up, I eventually understood that there could be something about me too. And a few years later, I got diagnosed with ADHD. My ADHD diagnosis, magically enough, happened just a month before I started my forest school training. So there is some of the people who have trained me here tonight, and it was my first experience as a learner understanding that my brain thought differently, understanding that my needs were different, but also the first time that I've experienced a learning environment where all of it was okay, all of it was welcome, and just being able to do whatever I needed to do to regulate myself whenever I needed to without feeling judged, looked at, but just actually being encouraged to do whatever I needed to do was something totally different for me. I've never succeeded in academia because there was way too much, and I've never managed to get a degree, even if I should technically have the brain for it. Having such an open, welcoming learning environment made such a difference for me. I knew forest school was home. Wild Clan, I have since set up my own business. That being, I am not one of the people that are made for a full-time job. Unfortunately, I cannot regulate myself that easily. So being able to be self-employed and decide when and how I work made a big difference for me. So through Wild Clan, I offer Leave No Trace awareness courses. So talking to people about outdoor ethics. I offer forest school sessions. I am currently training to deliver forest basing and forest therapy sessions. And I also volunteer for a reference group, which is part of Sharing the Vision. So Sharing the Vision is the national mental health policy. They wanted for the implementation of that policy to have more people with lived experiences. So I get to review 100 recommendations that turns into national policy from the point of view of somebody who have ADHD and a collection of other neurodivergent conditions. So from being in the forest straight into national policy. So one of the things I wanted to talk about, what is neurodiversity? That's quite a big question, and not everybody always quite understand how broad this is. So neurodiversity is the natural variation in how people think, process, and experience the world. That's quite a broad definition. So those variations come from the brain structure, the development, and the functioning. And there is three factors to that, which is a combination of genetics, environmental, and developmental factors. So there is a lot of different layers to it, and that is probably why there is so many different ways to be affected and have a basically different brain from, we'll call it the average. So that is a list of some of the conditions that would be considered as neurodivergent. So we have talked about autism spectrum disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Just because I've get to know that one quite a bit, it's actually not a deficit. We don't have less attention than anybody. If anything, we have too much. We don't know how to regulate it. We will pay attention to everything. Today, I was at a creative writing workshop. We were asked to go outside, take in the landscape and write about it. There are two participants who decided to take that time to catch up because they hadn't seen each other for a long time. Technically, nothing wrong with that. But with my brain, I was not able to focus on what I was doing because I was half tuned in with the conversation that was going on at the same time. So we also have things like dyspraxia, dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, epilepsy, Tourette, auditory processing disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, generalized anxiety disorder. It's all conditions about how the brain works differently. Like Diarmuid mentioned a bit earlier, neurodiversity, for me, the first element that I even look at is the senses, because they all have, all those conditions that I mentioned have a different and unique way to process sensory information, and that will lead to difference in perception, behavior, and interaction with the environment. And that can show up as heightened or reduced sensitivity, integration challenges, so how you receive the information and how it basically click together in your brain, and has an impact on regulation. So regulation is when we are able to cope with change, with demands, with our body's demands, and quite a lot of us neurodivergent people spend most of our time dysregulated, so it's quite a challenge sometimes to get back to regulation. So what do our senses do for us? The senses are how we perceive and interact with the world around us. So they are information on our environment. A sign might trigger, might make us think of danger. A light might make us react in a different way. They help us build connection to people, places, and experiences. So that's how we create any kind of memory of our connections. And we also respond to the stimuli. So usually it's around either safety or, in opposition, danger, comfort, and enjoyment. So I mentioned earlier, with ADHD, we have too much attention. So that means that any of the information that we get from our senses will accumulate one after the other. And sometimes our brain just get overwhelmed because there is so many information coming to us all at once, and we're not entirely sure which one to prioritize, which one we should just try to ignore and blank. So that leads us to sorry, again, I got something that got wrong. Never mind. I just want to get back to our senses. Unfortunately, my presentation went a bit funny. So the senses that everybody knows: sight, that gives us light, color, shape, and environment. We've got hearing, which give us signs including the pitch, the volume, and the rhythm. Touch, which give us an idea of pressure, texture, temperature, and pain. Smell, which give us the scent. Taste, which give us flavors. Now the following three are usually not that well known. So the proprioception, which is the sense, the position, movement, and force in your body parts in relation to each other and your surrounding. So that one is a little bit of a tricky one that takes a lot of time to kind of grasp your head around, but it's basically how you feel exterior pressures on you. We have our vestibular sense. So that's our sense of balance and spatial orientation. For example, one of my challenges in terms of vestibular sense, I can not throw a ball properly or aim at a specific angle. I can bump into the table that I've been sitting in my house for years every time I walk past it. I will get cut into the handle of most doors that I walk past. I usually have my legs covered of bruises because I'm always missing those like 2 inches to avoid that sharp angle and just walk straight into it. And interoception is about the internal feeling of the body. For example, for me, one of the challenges, I cannot make the difference between when my belly tells me that I'm hungry or that I'm anxious. Those two are really blurry. I can never quite tell which one is what. With the bathroom, I can be one or the other. I can spend the whole day without needing to go to the bathroom, but once the evening comes, I'm in the bathroom every half hour, even if I barely have anything to pee anymore, but I'm still getting mixed up with all those signals. So our senses are like, we don't really think about how many decisions our brain is making on a daily basis with all this information coming at us. And to me, that's why forest school is magic, because our brain can regulate itself a lot better in nature than in cities. Our society have has evolved a lot faster than our brain has in some way. So like Diarmuid mentioned earlier, that the bird singing helps us to relax. Yeah, that was a thing from hundreds and thousands of years ago, because when you hear a bird sing, that means that there is no predator, so you're safe, your body can relax. So it's all those kind of cues that for hundreds and thousands of years, our body have been used to that. It's like being around a fire as a circle. That's something that is very natural for our body as well as for our communities. So it's basically tapping into all those little things that have worked for centuries to get back to try to reduce the overwhelm that we get in everyday life, kind of thing, in everyday society. So I believe there is two different ways when it comes to the senses. So you might have somebody who will be avoidant. So some things are just too much and they can't deal with it, and they will try anything they can to avoid it. And when I say sensory avoidant, the one thing that is a bit tricky is that it's not all the senses that will be avoidant, and it's not at all the time avoidant. There is some days where regulation is a bit better, so we can manage something a bit better, but it's a fine combination of quite a lot of different elements. And as you can guess from sensory seeking, we have basically the opposite of the avoidance. Some people might crave certain inputs. I see it, I myself have a bunch of diggers in my forest school where that is the main interest, and it is what they are after, and that's would be part of like your proprioception, so feeling the pressure on the shovel and the digging and the curiosity. Any kind of proprioception activities, so squishing into small places, swinging the hammock, they're all the kind of activities that the children that like digging, in my group at least, also enjoy. Now, I have two big scary slides about to come up with a lot of information. I don't expect you to read all of it. I will happily share it for the platform where we have resources available, but it's just to give you an idea. So the green one will be about sensory seeking, and the red one will be about sensory avoidance. I'm not going to talk, and I'm going to leave you a few minutes to have a look. I know that I can't read something if there is somebody talking over it. So first one. Also, you don't have to read everything. If you're happy enough, I'm going to move on to the next one. Again, that will be available for you to have a look at and have a proper think at another time. So the reason I wanted to share this kind of information with you is because I know that as forest school leader, there are many of us that are absolutely fantastic at observing our environment, the learners that come through our sessions. So basically with those things, I would like to invite you after the webinar to get familiar with your senses, first of all, because some of them are still, I every now and then struggle to find a way to explain them or things like that. Observe, first of all, your own needs. I will explain it once I tell you a bit more what I mean. Try to identify which senses are engaged. Are you seeking or avoidance? And try to think of a different activity that could fulfill this need. So I mention that because the more we practice this kind of awareness on ourselves, first of all, the more we understand ourselves, but also the easier it becomes for us to identify that into our learners. Now, don't get me wrong, we're not OTs, we're not occupational therapists, so it's not something that's going to be easy to do. It's going to take quite a bit of practice, and you might get it wrong sometimes. But if you start always practicing with yourself, you get a better understanding. I'm going to use an example. In this autumn at some point, I was not able to get my medication for ADHD, and I could feel that I was very dysregulated, especially emotionally. And I could feel that what I call my body felt a bit fuzzy. So there was that energy that I couldn't quite get, and I didn't know how to manage it until I find myself craving the heavy metal that I was listening when I was a teenager. I hadn't listened to that for years, and I just felt like something needed to move. So I first started to try to move things to the sound of that music, and it felt a bit better. And then I've realized that what I needed was a sense of weight and the pull and push that was mentioned earlier in proprioception. So I ended up thinking, what else can I do? So I went to grab a big heavy chain that I had and started to put that on my shoulder to try to feel the extra weight that I was seeking. And it helped a bit, but not fully quite. So what I ended up doing is come and ask my husband to sit on my shoulders because I needed that deep, heavy pressure. And actually, him sitting on my shoulder for 15 minutes brought me back down and got me grounded again. So it was just understanding what my body was asking me, because our body always know what we need. But because I was able to listen to it and I had that awareness, I was able to connect and be able to then think of another activity that would work for me at that time. If you want more information on this kind of thing, in Marina Robb's book on the pedagogy of forest school, there is quite a bit of information that might help you to understand a bit better as well the senses. So the next thing that I want to bring up is what we call picture exchange communication system. So we call that PECS for short. You might have seen them before, you might not be familiar. Usually PECS are little images like this. It is used for different reasons. It can be a support for nonverbal communication. So not everybody will be verbal. I have worked with children who are not able to use their voice, but have a board in front of them with a lot of different images, letters, people that they see, and they are able to have a full conversation with anybody who can read that table. And the fact that they are not able to use their voice have no link with the quality of their interaction. I even remember when I was teaching French, I had a young lad who couldn't use his voice, but was able to make sentences in French just by pointing, and he was sharp. So that is one way you can help a nonverbal learner. Another way where you can see here is that it can help with transition and predictability. So back to what was said earlier, I like to have a timetable of this is what happened at forest school, and I have, if I'm working currently on it, but having visuals like this. And once something is done, you can, usually we use those with Velcro on both sides. So once you have one that's done, you remove the part that is done and you've got the rest of the schedule. It also works as little books. So this way you can have your learner engaging directly with you. Some people sometimes needs little strip that says first and then, because translation sometimes is quite a hard thing, and can take quite a bit of time as well. I know that I personally, as an adult, need a lot of time to transition from one activity to another. So being able to give a heads up to your learner that there is going to be a transition might be something to consider. And this little one is also to provide visual cues for activities to learn these kind of things. So what you might want to do is, if you have your timetable with those images, then maybe stick some of those images on the box where you've got your arts and crafts. Stick one of those images in the place where you've got the tools, just so this way they will have access to, they will know what you mean by, or even the spaces. So there is a lot of already made like these specs, but I have been having a bit of a hard time to find some that would work for forest school. So I've been working on this, and whenever I'll be done with it, I'd be happy to share it with for resources as well. But just something to consider, maybe trying to get a designer basically to work on those and have a set of those to make forest school a bit more accessible might be something that could be quite interesting to look into. And because it's a very short time, I've put just a list of other adaptation that I'll mention briefly now. So ask a parent or a guardian. Two sides of this. You might have parents and guardians that have done a lot of research and have got an amazing understanding of their child. You might also have some parents that don't always quite fully understand. It's so different for so many different people that it can be a hit and miss. But most of the time, they'll be at least able to tell you, these are the things that really don't work with my child. These are the things that help. Gradual integration. Don't expect somebody to stay for the full 2-hour session right away. I've been working with a young lad who is about, I think, 6 or so. We started by me and his mom having a conversation, me not even engaging with him yet, just him seeing how I interact with the mom first. And the next time I saw him, I said hi, maybe asked, how you doing? It didn't answer to me. The next time, we engaged a little bit more. The next time we went to visit the site. So it's all, it might not be, it might seem like a tiny step for you, but for some learners, that might be what it will take. Just small increase of how long we spend together and how we get on, and seeing the parents just getting on with us kind of thing. So just tiny steps. The social story that was mentioned earlier, so it's always good to have in different formats where you meet, where do at what point do the parents leave, what do your toilets look like, because I know that I have had people that felt too exposed in the toilet that I made with the tarp in the forest school. So I ended up with a hunting hide to be able to give them more privacy. Create spaces. I have split my forest where anything that is behind my fire circle is the quiet space, and all learners are all aware of this. It's not just for some people at some time, it's always, this is a quiet area. If you want to run, shite and be light and whatever, it's on that side of the forest. And everybody knows that if you pass that line, it's because it's calmer and relaxed kind of zone. Hammocks and ropes are brilliant for proprioception. They help a lot. Sensory baskets, that would refer to what Diarmuid mentioned earlier with patterns and things like that. So the scales of a pine cone, the little dents that there is on the acorns, just things to look at and to feel. Earplug, ear defenders, because a lot of people struggle with noises. Now, to be fair, in the woodland, I have not seen that many children wanting them, but if you have a mixed group, or well, if you basically have some people a bit noisier in one group, you might want to consider. Hat and blindfold is in terms of light regulation. Gloves is for if you have somebody that is not wanting to engage with getting dirty or things like that. It's always a good one. Again, it's like gradual integration, one tiny step at a time. Maybe one day they'll feel comfortable taking them off.
Pouki.
A sound and visual timer that is
Pouki.
to help with transition.
Hi, I'm
Yes.
just checking in, which just giving a little hello to let you know we're kind of getting tight on time. So just
It's the last slide.
90 minutes past. It's the last slide. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Great.
And just I'll finish. The nailing log is also good for a school idea of a log, a hammer, and a nail that's also proprioception, something heavy where you know that you can let out some energy. So a good one to consider as well. That is me, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Pouki.
Thank you, Pouki. That was just lovely. Listening to your information and giving us some of your valid heart, I suppose, your felt sense of your experience with the senses as well. And some lovely tips. And I also want to say deep gratitude for your offer for the tech system when you get to create that and finish that off. I'm very grateful for that kind offer, because I can understand that's a big piece of work. Yeah.
And if I can just mention with the Amber's question from earlier, with the circle, I use an object that I pass around, so this way I know when whose turn it is, kind of thing. The second thing is that I try to do a bit of movement, because when you move a little, that kind of distract your brain from getting too worried or anxious. So I'd ask everybody to do an animal movement or something like that. And to me, the circle is important because I start with 10 minutes of do whatever you want to go regulate yourself, but the circle is one of the routine, basically, kind of thing. It's one of the things that don't change in forest school. Circle at the opening, circle at the end. It's what create a bit of routine. I find that I think it helps a bit. But again, back to definitely always check with your learner, because there is so many different ways to be neurodivergent.
Absolutely. And yeah, I love the importance of having that safety piece and that routine, that opening and finishing, I think is really, really important to hold those spaces, even though they can be tricky. But they're very, very important. Yeah. So we're getting towards the end of our gorgeous presentations. We've had gorgeous 3 presenters, and we're just opening the floor to questions. If any guys have any thoughts, wonderings, comments, feel free to pop them into the chat box.
I'll just jump in there, Kathy, if it's okay, because there was a question. Yeah, there was a question asked mid-flow there, Pouki. So, and I just want to say thank you for your own personal input, Pouki. I think it's always so valuable when we know people are coming from, personal experience, and sometimes it's not always easy to share that in an open space. So I just want to honor that really, Pouki, and to thank you sincerely, because I think it just makes such a difference for everyone, really, to hear a personal account and a personal story of someone's journey. And your journey certainly has been quite extraordinary. So thank you so much, Pouki. Yuki asked a question along the way, so I'm just going to read this out. I hope, Yuki, you're still here. If we couldn't provide what a child with neurodiverse needs, and there is an incident where he caused a minor accident to make another child upset, pushed or said something in a mixed group, apart from giving him comfort, what is the best way to explain it to the other child or the parents of the other child? I don't know if either Pouki and or Diarmuid and or Gala want to pop in there. So between the three of you, feel free. Thanks, Gala.
Oh God. So you're explaining to the parents of the other child who's upset by, I suppose there's many different ways you could do it. I tend to be quite honest, and I tend to be quite straightforward. Do you know, I do kind of explain things in the sense of, you know, there could be overstimulation, there could be high excitement, there could be confusion. You know, and I'm quite fair like that. But I also would really just try to calm things down and look at the reality of it, you know. I think sometimes the neurodivergent child might be stigmatized, might be getting a hard time anyway. You know, if it's a group that knows this child, you know, he or she might already be having quite a difficult time and can feel quite self-conscious of that. So I suppose I'm quite a fair person in that sense, and I would probably side with the neurodivergent child in that. I don't know what I'm trying to say. Do you know what I mean? Like
I do, and like I think, funny enough, like another thing that just occurs to me as well is that, like, I remember a few years ago doing a talk in MTU, CIT as it was at the time, to lecturing staff. And one lecturing staff brought an example of someone who, a first year student, who in the lecture hall would at times jump up and say, "I want to die," and run out of the room. And the lecturer brought this to us, you know, in the conversation or whatever. But what it was the person was becoming overwhelmed. And I want to die in that situation was, I want to not be here. I want to get out of this situation because if it feels so oppressive to me or whatever. It just occurs to me as well, like, that's the other thing. I know it's not necessarily answering the question directly, but I think it's another thing to take into consideration is, like, could the child have been overstimulated? Could it be something to do with what we're doing here? You know what I mean? Is in
Lovely. Yeah, thanks, Diarmuid. I'm just going to read through some of the questions because people have made some lovely comments as well along the way. So Ellie was saying, which I think I that's exactly what I thought, Ellie, when you wrote this also. Too much attention is such a great way of understanding ADHD. Thank you so much, Pouki. That really resonated with me also. From Niamh, I loved his presentations. It had some wonderful insights to help fill the gaps. The visuals were a great, Pouki, really helped and really enjoyed it. And from Ellie again, haven't heard about synesthesia before. Can they signpost to some simple, accessible information about it? Again, we'll come back and we'll put a little resource sheet together and we'll make sure that everybody gets that information. And Niamh again in Galway, I think these extra measures will help all my learners. It will make the entire group feel safer and it will open more space for enjoyment, learning and exploration. Lovely, that's great. Thank you, Niamh in Galway. Niamh Galway Rainbows. So we have 3 minutes. If anybody has anything burning they want to say, or if anybody wants to put any other comments or questions in the chat box, now is your time. If anybody wants to say anything, or if any of the presenters want to, make any final comments or anything, please feel free. Got a couple of minutes left before we finish.
I see
there's a question that is unanswered. Somebody was asking, and for a neurodivergent child being treated badly, how do we talk to their parents? To me, that kind of thing, if they treated badly, is it by the rest of the group? Because if it is treated badly by the rest of the group, I would address that with the group before I would mention that to the parents. Because of being neurodivergent myself, it's quite easy for me to explain to the group, well, you know, I was a little bit like that when I was younger, kind of thing, and I understand that this kind of thing can be harder or things like that, because all the kids that we've got coming to forest school, I'm gonna guess it's more than likely the same for you. They absolutely love coming in, and they love like that we are the provider of that special fun time outdoors kind of thing. So if it comes from us, it's received a little bit better. So like a child that needs to isolate himself because he is overwhelmed, I explain them, well, you know, sometimes I take 5 minutes. Well, it's because I find it hard as well. There is so much noise, and I explain all the different layers of things to the group to help to give that child a bit of a chance. And to the parents, I explain what's happened and how I have addressed it the best I can.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you, Pouki.
Leona,
So just
Owen was just wanted to ask a question there. He had his hand up. Is that still the case?
No, that's kind of Pouki's answered the question. We just had a situation in our last session of a young 6-year-old with ADHD asking some of the others, "Can I be your friend?" And one of them said no, and he got very upset, you know, and we had to have a lot of one-on-one time with him to overcome it. But and I spoke to the parents. I spoke to the group then, you know, saying really, you know, we're here to work together, and along the lines of what Pouki was saying, though I didn't bring it to a personal, you know, because I do see that I have some ADHD traits, and you know, I kind of understand where it comes from, particularly a 6-year-old when he's kind of, you know, so friendly and so outgoing and needed a lot of personal time, but was faced with this kind of abrupt no, you know, to his request for friendship. And anyway, we'll see. Thank you very much, Pouki.
Yeah, thanks, Owen.
thanks, Owen. Okay, and finally from Laura, just thank you, Pouki, Gala, and Diarmuid. So informative, and I feel better. I feel better equipped to give neurodivergent learners the best forest school experience alongside their neurotypical friends. What a lovely way to end, I think, really. Because, you know, it is about inclusivity, isn't it? And it is trying also, you know, from our experience to be able to create an inclusive environment where that's the right thing to do. And I think it's some comments or some suggestions along the way also have said maybe we need to think about having particular types of groups also. So that there's a whole kind of piece there in relation to looking at how we work as practitioners. And certainly from my listening tonight, you know, this is just the first time, you know, we've all come together to have this discussion, but it's such a broad and huge space as well. So I think, you know, our own learning is certainly ongoing. And this is the beginning, hopefully, where maybe we need to be continuing these kinds of discussions going forward. So to close, I would like to thank Pouki, Wild Clan, and Tagala and Diarmuid from Creot. Huge thanks to the three of you. What you've brought is enormous into the space here, certainly from my perspective. We will be collecting all the data, the information in relation to resources, and we'll pass that out to everybody as well after tonight. Finally, just to say something about our annual gathering. Ellie, did you want to say anything before we do leave?
Just to say we are planning our annual gathering. We are going to be holding the gathering on the 6th, 7th and 8th of June. So please do mark the date in your diary. We will be holding it at Common Knowledge in County Clare. There'll be social media updates, and as soon as we have our workshops agreed, we will have the tickets available. And as always, there'll be an early bird price and then a main conference ticket price. So yeah, watch this space for our next offering. Thank you to everybody who bought tickets and booked in for this spring webinar season. And just to kind of say, you know, The Irish Forest School Association is all about being association, a grassroots association. And we want to make sure that we're providing members with what they want, and, you know, and let us know what way you want us to move and what you want us to support and provide, and we'll endeavour to do that. One more thing I would say is we're always looking for new committee members, because the more we have, the less there is on each individual person. We all know as a collective, we do better together. So I'm planting seeds now for those of you who would like to blossom into committee members in June. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Ellie. Good, good one there. So thank you everybody for coming tonight. I know we kind of kept you a little bit later than we normally have done, but because we had 3 speakers, technically really, we decided to add on an extra little bit of time to give people time. So thank you everybody for tonight, and we will see you all along the way. We're going to just stay online, so I make sure I don't lose the recording of this session. So I just need a small little bit of tech support at the back end. So for now, thank you so much. Take good care, and we'll see you all again soon. Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for having me. Bye.
Bye.